Hey everybody, my name is John O'Donoghue. I'm the Fingal Chamber President. You're very welcome to today's Fingal Chamber event. Whether you're a returning member, a new one, or just attending as a guest interested in learning more, you're very welcome. Just to give you a bit of background, Fingal Chamber is the representative body for businesses in Fingal, with cross-sectional membership of over 400 companies supporting 18,500 jobs. The Chamber is committed to enabling the best environment for members to thrive locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. As the region's largest business organisation, Fingal Chamber provides a range of services with benefits that support business growth in a variety of ways. Firstly, we advocate and represent business interests and are the business voice to local and central government, helping members to influence decision makers and policy. Secondly, the Chamber's Network and Events programme enables members to grow their professional network, connect with businesses, and build leads. Thirdly, we provide the successful Chamber Skillner programme, where businesses can achieve results through collaboration and upskill their workforces through bespoke and subsidised training. Members can also avail of business profiling and promotional opportunities to enhance their brand in the region. And lastly, in relation to our offering and its benefits, the Chamber's busy export documentation service can assist users with efficient international trade, enabling them to expand their markets. Established in 1994, the Swords District Chamber of Commerce in 2011 joined with Dublin 15 Chamber and became the accredited chamber for the entire Fingal region. We now have members in every town from Balbriggan in the north to Santry in the south, from Howth in the east to Blanchardstown in the west. The members represent a wide selection of industries and activities such as aviation, information technology, logistics, financial services, hospitality, retail, and agri-foods. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Tánaiste for speaking at today's event and look forward to hearing about the economic and policy challenges facing him in his brief and the implications for the Fingal business community. Thank you also to Chamber CEO Anthony Cooney and Events and Communications Manager David Brannigan for organising this event. Finally, if you think the Chamber can help you, please engage with us. Our contact details are on the website, phone and email address, and we look forward to working with you in advancing business together. I'll now hand over to David Brannigan, who's your host for this morning. Thank you, David.
Thank you, John. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is David Brannigan. I'm the Communications Manager with Fingal Chamber. We're pleased you could join us and we're happy to host this business briefing from the Tánaiste Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment. After a couple of problematic years for businesses, the Tánaiste will give us an overview of the current and future economic and policy challenges facing him in his brief and their implications, particularly for the Fingal business community. Tánaiste's presentation will be followed by an audience Q&A. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome and hand over to Tánaiste and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Leo Varadkar.
First of all, hello everyone, and thanks very much for having me again. Hopefully we'll get to do something like this in person in the near future, but good to be able to engage with the Fingal Chamber. Obviously, the Chamber covers my constituency of Dublin West, or almost all of it. I've some of Dublin 15, I've all of Dublin 15, I've some of Dublin 20 and Dublin 7, but obviously the whole Dublin 15 area falls into the Fingal Chamber, and it's useful to have a large chamber that covers such a big part of the country. So I'll run through the presentation just to give you a sense of where we are at the moment in terms of what we're doing with business and for business, particularly out of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. And we'll move on to questions as soon as we can. So yeah, I suppose the first thing to say, which I think everyone's aware of at this stage, is when the pandemic first started, we were really worried about the long-term hit to the economy that might occur. We were kind of worried it could be as serious as the global financial crisis. But it hasn't turned out that way, actually. It's been strange in many ways that the economy has bounced back very rapidly. A lot of that is to do with the being able to support business and help people maintain their incomes in a way that we couldn't do after the global financial crisis. So about 40 billion euros worth of money was pumped into the economy. Most of that went into the temporary wage subsidy scheme and the employment wage subsidy scheme, which is now being phased out. A lot of it went into the pandemic unemployment payment as well. And then obviously big investment in healthcare and other areas that we needed to deal with the pandemic. So we're seeing a significant rebound in consumer spending. That's very much reflected in the VAT receipts. We're also seeing an increase in income tax take, and even though income taxes were reduced slightly in the budget, we're seeing about a 7% increase in the take from income tax. And that's probably down to the fact that there are more people working. People are working longer hours, and there is evidence of pay rises happening across the economy, particularly in the private sector. So that just gives you an idea of where the money went, the money we borrowed to pay for the pandemic. A lot to business, a lot to workers, a lot obviously in health as well, and then other areas. Compared to European countries like Germany, Italy, France, Spain, we kind of pumped more into the economy than those countries did. But there are some countries that did more. The kind of Anglo-American sphere, if you like, the US, UK, actually did a little bit more than we did in terms of the amount of money that was pumped into the economy. We did it for longer though, and the furlough schemes, the equivalent of the wage subsidy scheme, etc., in the UK has gone since last September. This is kind of one of the remarkable things that has happened. We now have, depending on how you calculate it, somewhere between 2.48 and just over 2.5 million people that work in Ireland. So that's more people that work in Ireland than ever before. We set a target of having 2.5 million people that work in Ireland by 2024. We think we'll exceed that, and we'll reach it quite soon. What we just don't know yet is how the phasing out of the PUP and the phasing out of the EWIS will play out. The phasing out of the PUP might free up people for work who are still on the PUP and maybe not working for some reason, or perhaps working and claiming. And then the removal of the employment wage subsidy scheme will mean that some non-viable businesses will probably close or lay off staff. We just don't know whether those staff will be reallocated to other businesses in other parts of the economy, or whether we'll see a rise in unemployment. It's just very difficult to know. But we do see employment growing across all regions, including Dublin. And interestingly, the percentage of women participating in the labour force has never been higher. There's lots of reasons for that, but probably is down to a combination of remote and flexible working becoming more of a reality, but also the fact that the kind of education, care, healthcare professions have expanded the public service too, and women would tend to be overrepresented in those professions. Last year was a record year in terms of our agencies. So there's always a churn every year, but we had a net increase in IDA jobs of nearly 17,000 last year. So notwithstanding the fact that we're not winning every investment, and the media will always focus on the ones that we don't win, we are actually winning more investments into Ireland than ever before. So notwithstanding the real constraints around energy, water, planning, all those things that we know are problems and that we're trying to deal with, housing too, Ireland is still seen to be a very good place to invest for international companies, and they're still coming here in record numbers. Enterprise Ireland also had a record year, nearly 12,000 net jobs created in Enterprise Ireland companies. That's Irish companies exporting abroad. We almost have as many people now working in Enterprise Ireland client companies as we do in IDA ones, which is really encouraging, because it helps us to counteract this view that it's all about multinationals. It's not. Enterprise Ireland has a bigger budget than IDA, and we have almost as many people now working in those Irish exporting companies as we do in the multinationals. And you'll know the work of the local enterprise offices, not least in Fingal, helping those kind of micro businesses and startups to create jobs, and a very good year there too. As you'll be aware, a lot of things are going to happen over the next couple of months. We're going to see the employment wage subsidy scheme phased out by the end of April. About 25,000 businesses still benefiting from that. For businesses that were hit by the 8 p.m. rule, mostly in hospitality, it ends on the 31st of May. The CRIS is pretty much gone at the moment because everywhere is open. Tax warehousing stays in place until the end of April, with the interest rates applying from the 1st of May, and the targeted commercial rates waiver ends on the 31st of March. So very aware that withdrawing those financial supports will have an impact. We just can't predict what that's going to be at the moment in terms of businesses. failing or having to lay off staff, but it does have to be wound out at some stage, and we think now is the appropriate time. You'll know the risks that we're facing because of inflation, with increasing costs for business and for consumers, and also the situation in Ukraine, which we'll probably touch on later on. We do aim for a normalization of budgetary policy. We have to start doing that again. Our national debt increased pretty dramatically as a consequence of the pandemic. You'll see it there, the 33 billion or so that was borrowed. That's the financial crisis, so that was a lot worse, obviously, that Great Recession, but a significant increase in our national debt in the last couple of years. And the plan really is to get back to balancing the books over the next couple of years. And we think we can do that and stabilize the debt. Our debt is about 47,000 euros per head in Ireland, which is one of the highest in the world. But because we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we are able to service it. And our average debt term is now 11 years and the average interest is about 2%. So in a pretty good position in terms of debt management. But that can change. Interest rates are going to rise. We all know that. It's an unfortunate reality that interest rates have been very low for a very long time, unprecedented in history, and they are going to start rising again. And that means the cost of government borrowing and the cost of us servicing our debt increases too. And we have to be ready for that. One of the good things about the pandemic is that we were in a good financial position before it happened. And that allowed us to act in a way that wouldn't have been possible under other circumstances. And as I've kind of learned from my time in politics, a major unpredicted crisis happens probably once every 10 years. And we need to be in good shape for the next one whenever that might arise. I hope Ukraine's not that, but you just wouldn't know. In terms of the three priorities that I said as minister, number one was to help businesses to respond to COVID and Brexit to survive and prosper. So that was done with the employing wage subsidy scheme. It was done with the CRIS and all those different things. We also have SCARP, the small company administrative rescue process, a sort of examinership light system to help companies that restructure, maybe those that are viable but have very big debts, perhaps to revenue, perhaps to landlords that need to be restructured. Keen to see how that works over the next couple of months. We have a lot of low-cost loans. I remember back in the global financial crisis, access to finance was a huge issue. It's still an issue now, but less of an issue. And a lot of that is because a lot of lending to business is now underwritten or partially guaranteed by the government in some way. And that ranges from the Future Growth Loan Scheme to the Brexit Impact Loan Scheme to the COVID Loan Scheme. And we're working up on a successor now to the Future Growth Loan Scheme, a long-term loan with a low interest rate for businesses that want to expand. And that was very popular. And we want to make sure we have a successor product for that this year, particularly focusing on businesses that are expanding, but those that are going to do things that are green and digital, which is the future. Second target was to reach 2.5 million people in work in Ireland by 2024, and that there are job opportunities in all parts of Ireland, including all parts of Dublin. And the third is to create jobs with better terms and conditions that are more sustainable, more secure and more valued. And I know that is seen as a cost by a lot of businesses, and it is, but I think it's also necessary if we're going to retain and attract people into the workforce. We need to make sure that we are doing well and we're competitive with our peers in terms of pay and conditions and standards. So we're bringing a new public holiday, bringing us up to 10, still below the European average, but not far off. Statutory sick pay kicking in later this year. The right to request remote working, and it is a right to request remote working, not a right to demand it. You'll know about the redundancy rights for people laid off during the pandemic, so that if people were laid off for a period during the pandemic, the government will cover the cost of the redundancy for them. And also other legislation like protecting tips in the workplace. And a lot of that is working its way through the Houses at the moment. And keen to have it all on the statute books by middle of July. In the wider space, we're doing a big refresh of legislation in the department. So the Competition Amendment Bill, which is a refresh and an updating and modernisation of competition law in Ireland. Nothing to fear for business, unless you're a business that's involved in price fixing or fixing tenders and things like that, because the penalties are going to be a lot harder for companies that do that. Or big companies that try and exclude small companies through cartels and collusion. A lot more sanctions and a lot more powers for the Competition Authority in that regard. The Consumer Rights Bill published there last week gets rid of the Sale of Goods Act. gets rid of the Supply of Services Act, brings in a new Consolidated Consumer Rights Act, which will update our consumer law and also bring it in line with European law. And the big change there really is around digital, extending consumer rights to that whole digital space of products and services that are uploaded and downloaded and streamed and so on, which is quite important too. There's employment permits bill as well, which we're using to modernize the employment permit system. That's a separate issue to the delay that we have at the moment in processing employment permits, which is a big problem at the moment. It's about a 19 or 20 week wait when it should be more like 4 to 6. So we've more than doubled the staff in that section. They are catching up, but it's going to be a couple of months, I think, before we get on top of that. It is largely down to a huge surge in applications for employment permits, 70% more than last year, 50% more than 2019. We've had to train up additional staff just to do the work, and that's been a real challenge. Initially, COVID was an issue, but they're all back at work now in the office, and it's just a case of training them up to do it quickly, and we will get there. But I know it's a real delay that is affecting a lot of businesses that want to get staff in where there are labour shortages, and I know that's a big problem in retail and hospitality and a lot of sectors at the moment. Project Ireland 2040, you know all about this. We're a country that underinvested in public infrastructure for a very long time for lots of good reasons. We're now trying to catch up, and the National Development Plan, Project Ireland 2040, is exactly that. So we're now one of the higher investors in public infrastructure in Europe, well ahead of countries like Denmark and the Netherlands. But they had a long time to build up their infrastructure, and we're in catch up really on that. And it's broadband, it's public housing, it's roads, it's rail, it's everything really, where infrastructure is just not where it should be for a country of 5 million people heading for 6 million with an pre-existing deficit. Metrolink, which you all know about, a project that I'm very supportive of. It's going to cost a lot of money, but I think we need to do it, and perhaps should have done it years ago, but had to be suspended back in 2011 because of the Troika and the IMF program and the position we found ourselves in. Was restarted, I suppose, in 2014 and 2015. And the progress since then has really been painstaking and disappointing and very slow for lots of reasons, some good and some not so good. But the intention is that it will go to railway order this year. And that's the crucial point. That's the planning permission essentially for the project to go ahead with an on-board Panola hearing and all the rest of it. And once that's done, it can then go to tender and we can start construction on it. But it is a big project, and it's going to take a lot of time to make it a reality, but I think we need it, and we're determined to make sure it happens. Dublin Airport, again, a place I know well from my time in the council and my time as Transport Minister, was doing really great there before the pandemic, badly hit by the pandemic, but got a lot of help from government. We never really had to fund Dublin Airport before, but we did it on this occasion. Nearly 97 million euros going to the airport to sustain its operations during the pandemic. And we expect aviation will bounce back strongly over the next year or two. I'm very keen to get new routes, or routes that were lost, re-established. And we all know the importance of the airport to economic life in Ireland and also in Fingal in particular. So a very strong supporter of the airport and keep in close contact with DAA and the council as well as the new aircraft noise content authority. So that's really it. Hope that's a kind of a rough overview of where we are and where we stand, and happy to take questions, and just as importantly, any views or comments are very welcome as well.
Thanks very much, Tánaiste, for your presentation. We have a couple of questions in, one or two that we pulled together ourselves as part of the Chamber team. First one we'll start off with, what are the government's plans to support the kind of growing Irish SMEs in the coming years? I know you mentioned a little bit there about grants there for future growth, I suppose aligned with some of the more sustainable projects that are coming out of Ireland. Can you speak a little bit more about that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose there are a couple of things. We often talk about the kind of twin crisis that we faced, which was Brexit and the pandemic, and the twin transition that we need to embrace, and that is digital and that is green. So we're setting up two funds, a digital fund to help small businesses in particular to go digital, There's a few things already like the online retail and trading vouchers and so on, but this will be much bigger than that. And we have European money to do that. And we'll do something as well on the climate side to help businesses to become more sustainable. We have SCARP, which I mentioned, which is the new restructuring system for small businesses that get into trouble. We're in the process of launching the regional enterprise plans. So should have the one for Dublin done quite soon. There'll be 20 million, at least 20 million to back that up. And the first plan went very well. So we want to build on that over the next period ahead. Access to finance is important. I kind of talked about the government-backed loans already, but we have a new equity fund as well, which we think will be really good for startups and scale-ups, getting equity finance that they used to have to go to America for and other places, because we want to see 2 or 3 Irish unicorns every year, and we want them to happen here rather than in California or Paris. So that fund is now in place. We're also taking a look at the whole issue around capital gains and keep, because I think small companies and startups and scale-ups need to be able to reward their staff and retain talent. And they're often, particularly in the tech space, the digital space, that they're competing with Facebook and Google and big companies that can pay a lot of money. It's true in pharma as well. And the KEEP program that we have just isn't working. The take-up's been very, very low. We need to look at that and see if we can do something around share options and capital gains that would help in that area. And then finally, I suppose it's just the resources for the agencies, for the Enterprise Ireland and for the Leos, which are going to increase. We're going to get rid of this 10 employee rule when it comes to local enterprise offices, so that they can help slightly larger companies. There are limitations to that around EU state aid rules, but as a principle, it'll be gone. And try and help businesses, I suppose, in those different ways. Very conscious, though, that different sectors are in a very different place. Hospitality hit really hard by the pandemic, and now really struggling with to recruit staff. Very much appreciate that they're in a different space and will need attention. So the events and the art sector in a different way than will be the case, I suppose, for the tech, medical, digital devices, pharma area, which really grew during the pandemic, thankfully, because it gave us the resources that we needed.
You mentioned hospitality there. Can I focus in a little bit on that? Obviously, Fingal, home to Dublin Airport, number of hotels along the nice coastline we have and everything, just outside Dublin City. Big hospitality and tourism industry there, as a percentage sector-wise. What's your department's outlook on those sectors going into the end of this year and next year? Obviously, we've had a very rough time over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I suppose primary responsibility for them falls to the Department of Tourism and Minister Catherine Martin rather than me. But rather than having them fall 2 stools, we decided to work together on it. And we co-chair this hospitality forum, which meets every couple of months and meets with the sector. And we try and work together as best we can on it. I think that the main thing that we're going to need to do is to drive business again, to get international tourists back into the country, get conferences and events back into the country. And then also get the kind of domestic business going again. And I think that will happen. And there are good plans in terms of financial support for the sector, the work of Fáilte Ireland and Tourism Ireland to make that happen. We'll leave the 9% VAT rate in place at least until August. And I know there are calls to extend that maybe for a bit longer in recognition of the fact that the sector didn't get the full benefit of it. I'm sympathetic to it, but it does cost money, and I'm not the Minister of Finance, so it's a thing we'll have to discuss in November to August. And then obviously a big area is skills and staff. Just huge numbers of people have left the sector, have found jobs in other sectors where they don't have to work as many weekends or evenings and maybe get paid more. So I think an improvement in terms and conditions is kind of inevitable. I don't think there will be a solution without that. But government will need to help as well, both in terms of training and also sorting out the work permit situation, which will help I think with the staff and also the phase out of the PUP. But certainly talking to people in pubs and restaurants in the sector, the main thing they're now saying to me is the difficulty getting staff, and we're very much aware of that.
Yeah, we're hearing it here in the chamber. Availability of skills and talent seems to be the major concern for businesses. And when we surveyed them just last month, it's becoming kind of more difficult and expensive as well for people to come over here and into the country and to take up some of those roles. What particular plans you have initially to kind of help Irish businesses fill some of those gaps, particularly in maybe sectors like you mentioned, tourism and transport as well, another one that's quite a large industry in Fingal.
Yeah, I'm very, very much open to ideas and suggestions from people at the meeting. The employment permits are definitely part of that. And then also the skills and the training. And you'll know there's a huge focus now on apprenticeships and further education. We really went for the knowledge economy in Ireland, huge numbers of people, record numbers of people attending university studying for degrees, which is great. But maybe we neglected a bit the other areas, like hospitality, like transport, like retail, like the care economy. We've big shortages now of people who will provide home care. We've no shortage in the budget, but we can't find, as a government, we can't find staff in those areas. So a lot around the apprenticeships and the reskilling and upskilling, not as much demand for these areas as we'd hope. A lot of the courses, places unfilled, which is a problem. And then obviously we can do stuff around the employment permits and the work visas. But again, and I think people in business accept this and realize this, terms and conditions are going to be important. If you can work in a supermarket for the living wage and you don't have to work evenings and weekends, if you're asking people to work evenings and weekends or to work in a care role, which can be quite challenging, you're going to have to be competitive with supermarkets in terms of what's paid and what the terms and conditions are.
Great. At this stage, I'll just remind anyone who's on the call, if you'd like to submit a question, you can do so through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, and we'll hopefully get to some of those. Next, a nice easy topic for you, Tánaiste. The housing crisis and the housing availability is obviously a huge issue, particularly in the Dublin region, has been for many years now. How long do you believe it will take before we've solved the housing crisis?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'd be afraid to put a date on it, because I think if you look back historically, the RT archives online are great to watch in some ways. We've almost always in Ireland have had a housing crisis of some form. It's just appeared in different ways, and if you look around the world, it's the same issue in America and across Europe. House prices in the Netherlands went up 17% last year, just to give you a small example. And places like Berlin and Austria and Vienna, which are often held up as models that we should follow in Dublin, when you ask people there what the biggest issue is, they say it's housing. So it's not a unique issue to Ireland by any means, but one that we're really struggling with. And I think a huge amount of it is obviously down to lack of supply. We used to build 30,000-40,000 houses a year in Ireland. When the construction industry and the banks crashed, that went down to a very small number, only a few thousand a year. So we're probably 200,000-300,000 houses short of where we should be. And we're now catching up again. I think there are signs of hope. More than 20,000 new homes built last year, even with the pandemic. 30,000 started construction in the past 12 months, and 40,000 came through planning permission. And that additional supply, I think, is going to help and is going to make a difference. Supply on its own isn't the solution, but without supply, there's no chance of us dealing with this problem. And then there's the other things that we're doing as well. Some really innovative measures, I think, around the local authority loans. People earning up to 65,000, single people can now get a low-cost mortgage from the local authority long term, which helps with affordability, because affordability is really the mortgage rather than the price of the house. It's how much you have to pay per month. And you're going to see, a lot of those new programs coming online, like cost rental, for example, already starting, and the affordable housing schemes. And that will definitely make a dent in it. And I think things are going to improve over the next couple of years. When it's going to be over, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows that for sure, but I definitely think it's going to get better.
Okay. It's been just 4 years since the most recent launch of the Metro project. Its delivery date has already now been delayed by 8 years, from the initially mentioned 2027 date of having passenger services to now to 2035, which is announced at the tail end of last year. Where does the blame lie on such a delay like that, and what lessons can be learned on that particular project thus far? And what's the government doing to fast track that project at the moment to make sure it is delivered maybe before 2035?
Yeah, and like to be honest, I wouldn't concede 2035 just yet. I guess we'll see. The next step is the railway order, which is the planning permission for Metro. We want to get that done this year. Next year, then is the whole tendering process, and then you'd hope construction will begin the year after. But it's a huge job involving a huge amount of tunneling, and it is going to take time. I think how long it would take in the past was maybe underestimated, and what it would cost was underestimated. That's also the story of the I shouldn't even bring it up, but it's also the story of the Children's Hospital in many ways. That how long it would take and how much it would cost was probably underestimated at the start. I saw in London they did an extension to the tube, and I think it was just over a mile long and had 3 or 4 stations, and it cost £1 billion. So that probably gives you an indication of what this project might cost in Irish terms, given that it's, I think, something like 10 kilometres and 17 or 18 stations. It's going to be probably the most expensive project that the government ever does. And it should be seen in that context. It is a mega project and not something we're particularly used to doing in Ireland. And we've had to learn a lot to get it done. But I am optimistic that this is for real now, and we'll have that railway order this year and get it out to tender next year.
Do you think the biggest challenges that might be down the line will be around planning, or do you think there's going to be issues with contractors and that we've experienced with other major projects, and perhaps, as we mentioned before, availability of skills and the level of talent that we need in this country to deliver such a project?
Like all those things are going to be challenges. The same people that were asking to build all the new homes, we're going to be asking to retrofit all the old homes and also build all the metros and new hospitals. And it's a huge, it's a huge amount of building. And then there's all the multinationals doing their developments too. So it's a huge amount of construction, civils and housing that's supposed to happen in a small number of years. So that's going to be a real challenge. And obviously the priority for the public, which has to be my priority when I knock on doors and talk to people, housing is what they want to be prioritized above everything else. So that'll have to come first. And then the economic infrastructure, I think, and social infrastructure comes in after that. And then the retrofit and the climate. So there's a lot. I didn't even mention all the wind farms. So there's a lot to be built, and it's going to be a huge challenge. The railway order, hopefully that'll work well. It's done through Bord Pleanála. There'll be oral hearings. Everyone will be able to come in who has an objection or has an alternative idea to the plan. And then the nature of things, once the railway order is agreed, it probably will be judicially reviewed. An awful lot of things get judicially reviewed now in Ireland, and we're trying to change the laws and rules around that. So it's a little bit harder for people to bring something to judicial review. They'd have to have a much better reason. The judge, before allowing one, would have to consider the consequences. And we're trying to do something around costs as well. It's not to stop people judicially reviewing projects. It's just that they're so much more frequent in Ireland than other countries, and seem to take much longer. Although I was encouraged, I have to say, by the decision there on the Glanbia plant, down the dairy plant and cheese plant down there in Kilkenny, and that was judicially reviewed and was heard very quickly by the Supreme Court. So I'd hope that if we end up in that place with this project, we can make sure any legal challenges are limited. But in order to reduce the risk of successful legal challenge, Bord Pleanála has to make sure that they do everything right, because the challenge is on the procedure rather than on the merits.
As you mentioned it just there, is there any update on the wind farm project? I know there's one sort of, there's plans for one off kind of North County Dublin area there, all the way up towards Drogheda. Is there any update on that project?
Not that I have on me at the moment, but I can check with the Department of the Environment and send it back to your members.
No problem. In relation to inflation, costs of doing business have been going up for a number of years. Is there any government plans to address this? I know that things have been in the news over the last couple of years, been the likes of rising insurance levels and that for businesses, and it's become difficult, particularly for some in the kind of event sector and things like that, to cover those. What's been done, or what are the plans to take place during this program for government?
I suppose a lot of costs are going up. Energy costs are obviously a huge cost for business that are rising, largely due to factors outside of our control, but hopefully that will moderate or stabilize or even come back a bit over the course of the year, although the Ukrainian situation potentially puts a spanner in those works. On insurance, I chaired the Ministerial Committee on Insurance Reform, and we are now seeing a fall in motor insurance costs. They're down about 20 or 30%. We expect this year we'll see a fall in home insurance. The one that I suppose is of most interest to businesses will be EL and PL, and we haven't yet seen any improvement in that. Notwithstanding the fact that we have the new personal injury guidelines, that's brought down the payouts by about half through the Personal Injury Assessment Board, but they still have to wash through the courts before the insurance companies are confident that these new award levels are for real. We're stepping up action on fraud, which people be aware about, and we've a new law coming through this year on duty of care to rebalance the responsibility, if you like, more towards somebody who's taking a risk themselves by going into particular premises or taking part in adventure activities. But I suppose what we know from the motor insurance, it was about 2 years after we got stuck into that the premiums started falling. And we're about 1 year now stuck into this insurance. So hopefully next year we'll start to see premiums fall. Some evidence that availability is a bit better now, but premiums not yet coming down, and that has to happen in my view.
Does the department have a viewpoint on the proposed operating conditions for Dublin Airport's new North Runway? And if it doesn't, do you have your own opinion on that stage that it's at the moment?
Sorry, give me that again.
So the Dublin Airport's new North Runway, it's with ANCA, and they're looking at bringing these proposed changes that the DAA put forth about operational flexibility at the airport. Do you have your own view on those that proposal brought by DAA? Yeah,
I think that's in process at the moment. So are out to consultation. So I probably should be circumspect and limited in what I say about that. And part of my constituency does cover the flight path, up around Hollystown, Tyrrellstown. There is a lot of noise from the airport. Obviously it's an issue on the other side in Portmarnock and Malahide as well. But I'm a big supporter of the airport. It is the gateway to Ireland. And I think it would be a shame if we invested so much money into an airport and into a runway to be in a position that we can't use it. So I'm sure we can find a solution that's fair to people. But ultimately, I think the common good has to prevail, and that means allowing our airport to operate.
Thanks. As local authorities in our area are seeking to develop more links along the Dublin-Belfast economic corridor, some of the services in Fingal area are now competing against NI and UK service providers who are able to take advantage of, I suppose, of lower costs and labour. Is there any sort of concerns around that connection with that maybe more all-Ireland economy and things like that we may encounter issues whereby businesses here are just too expensive to do work for, and will perhaps maybe lose contracts and that to ones across the border?
I think it's something we have to bear in mind. Like when it comes to a lot of areas like construction, Northern Ireland companies are supposed to be paying the rates here that are the legal rates. They can't actually pay Northern Ireland rates for work that's done here in the Republic. But that's very hard to enforce, and I'm sure there's ways around it too. So that's something I think we definitely need to bear in mind. The evidence that we have since Brexit and since the protocol happened is that there's been a big increase in trade in both directions to the benefit of both north and south. So I wouldn't see it as us losing out. I'd see it as an increase in activity in both directions. But certainly we'll be interested to hear any kind of concrete examples that your members may have of being undercut or being put at a disadvantage to companies in Northern Ireland, which we're obviously keen to avoid. The gaps that used to exist are a bit narrower, whether it's the gap in the minimum wage, they have a sick pay scheme, we don't yet. So, that there are swings and roundabouts in this.
A question in there. Are there incentives for people to be able to change their property designation from residential to commercial if their property is located in a village or town centre? The reason for this is that some small village centres need more businesses to be commercially viable.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll have to come back to you on that as well. we've mostly been doing the reverse, by the way, because in most parts of Ireland, particularly in rural towns and villages, there's loads of commercial premises that are boarded up and they're not viable anymore, from old pubs to old shops to you name it. And we've been trying to make it easier for people to turn those commercial premises into residential. And there's even grants for you to do that. And the planning permission is much more straightforward. You don't even need planning permission in some cases. Maybe the Dublin villages are a bit different, and it's the reverse, and it's commercial premises that we need. So leave that one with me anyway.
No problem. And I suppose getting to something that's really taken over the news in the last week, and rightly so, with respect to what's unfolding in Ukraine, what is your view, particularly in terms of the economic risk to Ireland's recovery?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, the situation is really, really terrible. The warnings were there for the last couple of months that Putin and the Russian Federation might be minded to do this. I think a lot of us kind of thought or hoped it wouldn't really happen, that he'd pull back at the last moment, having got some concessions, but he hasn't. And we're seeing unfold in Europe something that we haven't seen since the 1930s, a dictatorship and autocracy, a large military power trying to occupy and overrun a democratic country. And the good thing is, I think it has united the West. We're often disunited in the European Union, but even those countries that would have been sympathetic to Russia or would have tried to appease them in the past have changed their mind. And that even goes for politicians in Ireland who would have been a little bit too sympathetic maybe to Russia in the past, and to Putin, very much changing their mind in the last couple of weeks, and that's welcome. And you're seeing a real united European response to this. I think we'll do everything short of actually sending troops. Arms are going to go in, and all sorts of other financial support and financial sanctions. What I'm kind of hoping is we'll get to the point where there will be talks, that the invasion hasn't gone as Putin expected, that there will be talks, and that there'll be a political solution to this, in which case it mightn't have as serious an economic impact as we feared. But we can't assume that, and we are preparing for the worst. And it's not that we have huge amounts of trade with Russia or Ukraine, we don't. It's more the knock-on effects in terms of energy prices and aviation and so on. And that will have an impact on business, and we're going to have to help those businesses that are affected. I think we learned maybe from COVID how to do that very effectively. And if Irish businesses suffer because of this, then I think government needs to help them to survive and to adapt. And we learned, like I say, we learned to do that really from the pandemic. But I think these actions have to take place. I'm the minister responsible for jobs and for business, but I just can't stand over what's happening in Ukraine. And I think a lot of businesses feel the same. You see businesses cancelling events, cancelling orders, selling their BP, pulling out of Russian energy, things like that. And that's a very encouraging response from business, I think.
Great. Isn't that, Tánaiste? That's all the questions we have in there for the moment. I'd just like to first of all thank our Chamber President, John O'Donoghue, for opening today's event, and also like to thank yourself, Tánaiste, for accepting our invite to speak with local businesses in this webinar series. For everyone else to support our work and to allow us to keep hosting these independent business briefings. If you're not a member, please consider Chamber membership. If you are, please recommend us to those in your network who you feel may be interested. I encourage you to check out our upcoming activities on the Chamber website. That's fingalchamber.ie. But for now, thanks very much for joining us. Stay safe and slán go fóill.
Thanks a lot.